The debate hall at Georgetown University pulsed with anticipation. Students packed the aisles, journalists filled the corners, and the air buzzed with tension. What had been billed as a thoughtful discussion on youth leadership in American society was about to erupt into the most unexpected confrontation of the year. On one side sat Jerry Falwell Jr., former university president and once powerful religious figure, now attempting a public reinvention as a cultural and political thought leader. He adjusted his designer jacket with the confidence of someone used to being listened to. His posture broadcast certainty. His name still carried weight. Across from him, however, sat someone who seemed cut from another cloth entirely. Jonathan Roumie, actor, speaker, and a quietly rising voice for faith-based authenticity. Roumie had been invited to speak on spiritual leadership for the next generation. He wore no sharp suit, carried no air of entitlement. Instead, he sat with calm humility, his presence drawing attention not through bravado, but through peace. What followed would leave the nation stunned. Falwell's opening words carried the rhetorical polish of a televangelist. "Jonathan," he said with a tight smile, his voice steady but patronizing. "With all due respect, your gentle approach to faith might inspire social media followers, but it lacks the strength to guide America's youth in today's cultural war." The room shifted uncomfortably. Phones came out. This wasn't going to be a routine discussion. Falwell continued, his tone sharpening. "You preach vulnerability and compassion, but this generation needs strength, control, power. You offer softness when we need soldiers. You've never run a university, never taken on political enemies. You may act the part of Christ, but you're not ready to lead in his name." Roumie remained still. His face betrayed no reaction, but something in the room began to turn. Then Falwell leaned forward. "Let's be honest," he said. "You're more concerned with appearing holy than actually leading. You quote scripture but offer no action plan. Your message comforts. It doesn't confront. Frankly, I question whether you're fit to be a guide for today's young believers." The tension in the hall tightened. A few students whispered. Roumie finally spoke, his voice soft, deliberate. "Mr. Falwell," he said gently, "before questioning my fitness, perhaps we should take a moment to reflect on what leadership truly means. Not the optics, not the title, but the heart behind it." Falwell's expression hardened. "I've been in leadership my whole life," he shot back. "I've built institutions, taken political stands, defended Christianity in the public square. You talk about humility and prayer while the culture burns." Roumie tilted his head slightly. "And yet," he said, voice still low, "sometimes it's the quiet truth, not the loudest voice, that brings light to darkness." Then Falwell stood, towering over the seated Roumie, his voice now booming. He declared, "You are not a leader, you are a symbol. And symbols don't build movements. They decorate walls. You're unfit to shape the next generation of Christian leadership. Your theology is too soft. Your compassion is weakness. You don't understand the battle we're in." The word unfit hung in the air like a thunderclap. Roumie didn't flinch, but the cameras didn't stop rolling. And what came next, the moment Roumie reached calmly into his jacket pocket, would silence the room and change everything. The word unfit echoed in the chamber like a thunderclap. Students gasped. The moderator froze. In an instant, the room shifted from academic discourse to something far more personal, a public unmasking. Jonathan Roumie remained still for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without raising his voice, he slowly reached into the inside pocket of his modest coat. "Mr. Falwell," he said, calm but firm, "before we continue this discussion on who's fit or unfit to lead young Americans, I believe this audience deserves to hear something." He held up his phone, his finger hovering over the screen. "This is a recording from 3 weeks ago, and I believe it speaks directly to the heart of this conversation." A hush fell over the room. Falwell's confident demeanor flickered for the first time. What are you doing?" he asked, his voice straining, just above a whisper. Roumie's eyes met his, then turned deliberately to the audience and the cameras. "I'm going to play a recording that reveals the type of leadership you've actually been offering, behind closed doors, away from your followers, away from your podium." He tapped play. The audio poured through the room's speakers, clear, unedited, familiar. It was Jerry Falwell Jr.'s voice, unmistakably his. "I don't really believe half of what I say on these panels. It's all about optics. Jonathan's style might get applause, but my crowd wants dominance. You preach humility, I play power." A second voice, a journalism student, asked, "But what do you actually believe in?" Falwell replied, laughing under his breath. Belief? Honestly, the whole Jesus washing feet approach doesn't move the base anymore. I say what fires them up. Weakness doesn't sell. The room went deathly still. Phones froze midair. The only sound was the breathless silence of betrayal. Falwell's voice continued. Roumie? He's probably more authentic than most pastors I know. But if I said that on stage, I'd lose my leverage. This is about building power, not building saints. I'll call him unfit, soft, a danger to the faith, not because it's true, but because it works. That's what this generation doesn't get. It's not about truth, it's about control. People don't follow sincerity, they follow force. The kingdom's a campaign now. And then silence. For the first time since stepping onto a public stage, Jerry Falwell Jr. looked like he'd been stripped of armor. His face drained of color, his polished veneer shattered. That recording, he stammered, that was private, taken out of context. Jonathan Roumie stood slowly. It was a conversation, or what he said quietly, with a Georgetown journalism student who was profiling your re-entry into public life. A student who believed the public had the right to know who you really are when the lights are off and the mic is down. Suddenly, the height difference between the two men meant nothing. Roumie's voice deepened, not with anger, but with conviction. You stood on this stage and called me unfit to guide young believers. You questioned my strength, my faith, my convictions. But this recording reveals what you believe, or rather what you don't. He turned to the crowd. He admits I'm more qualified. He admits he manipulates audiences. He admits he sees faith as strategy, in truth as inconvenience. Phones lit up again, fingers tapped, students stared, some in awe, others in visible disillusionment. So let me ask you this, Roumie continued, voice rising with righteous clarity. Who is truly unfit? Is it the man who walks in humility, believes what he says, and serves not for attention but for God? Or is it the man who admits to lying about his beliefs, deceiving his audience and treating ministry as branding? Falwell opened his mouth. No words came. Roumie stepped forward. You speak of biblical values, but the foundation of faith is truth. The cornerstone of discipleship is sincerity, and the heart of leadership is service, not theater. The room, once a battleground of ideologies, now felt like a sanctuary pierced by truth. I'm not perfect, Roumie added, but I believe what I say, and I refuse to treat faith like a costume worn for applause. A moment later, the room erupted in applause. Not the polite claps of students hedging opinions, but roaring, rising, sustained applause, the kind born of moral clarity. For the first time in years, Jerry Falwell Jr. had nothing to say. The man who had once commanded stages now looked small. He gathered his notes hastily, avoiding every camera lens, and whispered, "No questions," as his team helped him slip out a side door. And in his place stood silence, and a man of peace who had never once raised his voice, but had just won the debate by telling the truth. Within minutes of the debate's conclusion, the internet ignited. #Falwell Exposed began trending across X, formerly Twitter, climbing to the #1 spot in under 2 hours. The most viral clip? The exact moment Jonathan Roumie pressed play, followed by the look on Jerry Falwell Jr.'s face as his own words shattered the persona he had carefully built. The video was shared over 100,000 times in the first hour alone. Conservative social media circles descended into chaos. Many of Falwell's longtime supporters were left stunned, betrayed. We believed in him. Turns out it was all a performance. He's not the future of faith. He's the reason people are losing it. The account @Falwell2028, once flooded with support and prayers, fell silent. On the other side, progressive and faith-based Twitter exploded with praise. Jonathan Roumie just delivered the most devastating exposure of religious hypocrisy I've ever seen. This is what true leadership looks like: calm, honest, prepared. He didn't shout, he didn't mock, he just told the truth, and truth won. By the following morning, every major news network had picked up the story. CNN opened its morning segment with "Georgetown Debate Shock, Recording Exposes Falwell Jr.'s Private Views." Their lead analyst remarked, "This marks a dramatic fall from grace for someone who once claimed to lead with spiritual authority." MSNBC ran 3 full segments dissecting the implications. One host commented, "This is what happens when the gospel becomes branding." Falwell admitted it himself. Faith was just a strategy. Even Fox News struggled, usually eager to defend any figure tied to the evangelical right. Their coverage was notably muted. They aired short, clipped responses, clearly trying to avoid a full collapse in credibility. Back on Georgetown's campus, the fallout was swift and personal. Students who had once idolized Falwell as a warrior for the faith began questioning everything. The Faith and Freedom Forum, which had grown rapidly under his influence, lost 60% of its members within a week. "I felt betrayed," said Emily Rhodes, a junior theology student. "I changed the way I talked about my faith because of him. And now I realize it was all calculated." Professor Daniel Myers, who taught Roumie's ethics and leadership course, offered sobering commentary. "This wasn't just about theology, this was about character. We expect truth from our students. What happens when leaders abandon it?" The university administration, while unable to punish Falwell for his views, released a formal statement acknowledging that the incident raised serious concerns regarding academic and spiritual integrity. 3 days after the incident, Falwell's legal team issued a carefully worded statement. "The recording played by Mr. Roumie was taken out of context and recorded without my knowledge or consent. My statements were made in a private conversation and do not reflect my sincerely held beliefs. I stand by my critique of Mr. Roumie's theological positions. This smear is exactly the kind of media spectacle I've long worked to counter." But the damage was already done. Social media users were quick to respond. "You called it theater. You were the theater. This isn't a smear, it's a mirror." Meanwhile, Jonathan Roumie appeared on CNN, The View, and a dozen major faith-based podcasts, not to celebrate, but to emphasize something deeper. "This was never about humiliating anyone," he said gently. "It was about revealing how dangerous it is when public faith becomes performance. Our young people deserve leaders who believe in what they preach." The response was electric. His social media following surged by over 200,000 within a week. Donations to his nonprofit faith outreach tripled. Major spiritual influencers began calling him a new voice for a new generation. Political and religious analysts called it a defining moment for American Christianity. "For years, we've watched as faith was turned into a tool for culture war victories," said Dr. Angela Martinez, a theologian at Duke Divinity. "But this was different. This was one man calmly holding up truth against manipulation, and the truth won." Perhaps most telling of all, the Falwell family remained largely silent. Even those who once jumped to his defense offered only vague support, careful not to reignite the firestorm. As one commentator put it, Jerry Falwell Jr. didn't just lose a debate, he lost the illusion. And Jonathan Roumie didn't need to shout to break it, he only needed to tell the truth. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a political theologian at American University, summarized it best. "When young people begin to see spiritual or political leadership as performance art, the foundations of both faith and democracy start to crumble." Well, conservative commentators, especially those who had once viewed Jerry Falwell Jr. as the polished successor to evangelical influence, struggled to respond. Many had invested in the idea that Falwell offered an intellectual, modern version of Christian conservatism. The recording had obliterated that illusion. But perhaps most telling of all was the response, or lack thereof, from the Falwell family. Even Jerry Falwell Sr.'s once vocal supporters fell quiet. No long defenses, no counterattacks, and from former President Donald Trump, a frequent social media defender of all things family values, only one dismissive post. "Jerry's young, he's learning. The fake media is brutal to people like us." It rang hollow, and it landed with a thud. 6 months later, the ripple effects still hadn't settled. Falwell had disappeared from the public faith space. His planned Christian Leadership and Power course at Liberty was quietly canceled due to lack of interest. Students said he had become withdrawn, avoiding debate forums and leadership events he once dominated. The man who had confidently walked into Georgetown preaching power and control had now become a symbol of something else entirely: the cost of hypocrisy, the exposure of spiritual branding, the fall from grace when conviction is replaced by calculation. Meanwhile, Jonathan Roumie's confrontation had become a case study in classrooms across the country, not in drama, but in ethics, theology, and political communication. Professors highlighted not just what he did, but how he did it. He stayed calm. He didn't attack, he revealed. He didn't gloat, he instructed. And most of all, he embodied the values he spoke about. His composure under fire, his moral clarity, and the way he turned the moment into a broader call for truth and leadership became a textbook example of what integrity looks like in modern public life. In the weeks following the debate, the student journalist who recorded the audio came forward. Jaime Martinez, a senior at Georgetown, no relation to the moderator, explained in an interview, "I wasn't trying to trap him. I just asked follow-up questions about his statements. But what he said privately was so different from what he preached publicly, I felt people deserved to know the truth." The recording raised questions about ethics, privacy, and journalism, but nearly everyone agreed. Once Falwell publicly questioned Roumie's fitness for spiritual leadership, his own sincerity became fair ground. Within a year, Jonathan Roumie was being called a spiritual statesman by major faith outlets. His nonprofit ministry expanded internationally. He was invited to speak at Notre Dame, the Vatican's Faith and Culture Forum, and dozens of youth gatherings. His debate performance, quiet, firm, fearless, became a benchmark moment in faith leadership. And Falwell, in a rare interview 2 years later, sitting far from the public eye, he finally reflected, it was a wake-up call. The difference between preaching for applause and serving with integrity. "I thought I could build something on charisma alone, but eventually the truth catches up." Whether his words signaled genuine repentance or another attempt to salvage reputation remained unclear. But for Jonathan Roumie, the victory was never personal. He had exposed the rot beneath the surface, not to destroy a man, but to awaken a generation. Final reflection. This wasn't about a debate. It was about truth, about leadership rooted in conviction, not performance, about reminding America, and especially its youth, what faithful public service is meant to look like. The confrontation became a parable of our times. When preparation meets integrity, truth doesn't need volume. It simply needs to be heard. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, if you believe truth, integrity, and authentic leadership still matter in today's world, then you're in the right place. Let us know in the comments. Do you think Jerry Falwell Jr. can recover from this? Or was this the end of the illusion? And if you want to see more powerful moments where faith, truth, and accountability collide, don't forget to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories that challenge power and uplift principles. Because in an age of performance, we're here to highlight what's real. See you in the next one.